Wyoming Territory, 1881. A lonely rancher stood on his porch, waiting for the stagecoach that would change his life forever. He thought he'd sent for a strong frontier wife to help tame the land. But when the door swung open, the woman who stepped down was nothing like he expected. She was delicate, beautiful, and blind. Clutching a small satchel, she braced herself for rejection. Instead, the cowboy reached for her hand, pressed it against his calloused palm, and whispered the words she'd never dared dream to hear. "You're home now." For months he had stared down cattle thieves, broken horses, and long winters alone. Yet now, as the coach drew near, his pulse beat harder than it had in years. He had written the letter himself, scrawled out in a shaky hand by lamplight, seeking wife, honest companionship, life on a working ranch. He expected a woman hardened by prairie winds, someone who could split logs and face down a blizzard without complaint. The coach lurched to a halt, dust clouds swallowing it whole. The driver climbed down, opened the door, and offered a hand. What emerged was not what Luke had imagined. A young woman stepped down slowly, her grip hesitant but graceful. Her bonnet shaded a pale face, delicate as porcelain, with eyes that did not quite focus. She carried no trunk, only a worn satchel pressed against her skirts. Luke's chest tightened. She was blind. Her voice came soft, almost trembling. "Mr. Hart?" "Yes, ma'am," he answered, though his throat had gone dry. She lifted her chin a fraction, as though summoning every ounce of pride left to her. "My name is Clara Whitfield. I came as agreed. If you wish to send me back, the coach is still here." Her fingers tightened on the satchel strap, knuckles white. "I know I am not what you expected." The driver cleared his throat, uncomfortable, already turning the team of horses back toward town. Luke barely noticed. His gaze lingered on the fragile woman standing before him, her shoulders stiff with humiliation, bracing for rejection like a blow. He stepped forward, slow and steady, until he stood close enough to see the faint tremor in her hands. Then, gently, he took one into his own, rough and calloused from years of ranch work. He pressed her palm flat against his, letting her feel the life and labor etched there. "You're home now," he whispered. Clara's lips parted, surprise softening her guarded expression. The wind carried silence between them, heavy yet tender. For the first time in years, Luke Hart felt something stir in the emptiness of his ranch, a flicker of belonging, of family not yet formed. And for Clara, who had been sold, dismissed, and overlooked by all who claimed to care for her, the warmth in his hand was more than welcome. It was a promise. The stagecoach rattled away, leaving them alone in the vast Wyoming wild. The bride who could not see, and the cowboy who had been blind to hope until this moment. The silence after the stagecoach left pressed heavy, broken only by the restless stamping of Luke's horse tied to the fence. Clara stood still, her hand still lingering against his palm, as if afraid to let go. Luke eased back, clearing his throat. "Long ride from Boston," he said quietly. Clara nodded, though her eyes didn't move to meet his. 3 weeks. I counted the days by the jangle of the harness and the wheels. I could hear the land changing. Her voice softened. "Out here it smells different, like pine and dust and something wild." Luke studied her, this woman in plain traveling clothes, bonnet strings trembling in the breeze. She looked delicate, yes, but there was steel hidden in the way she squared her shoulders, in the fact she had come all this way without kin, without protection. "Come inside," he said, picking up her satchel before she could protest. "We'll get you settled." The ranch house was sturdy, but plain-hewn timber walls, a wide hearth, the scent of leather and wood smoke clinging to the air. Clara's fingers brushed the doorframe as she stepped across the threshold, memorizing the world by touch. "This is your home now," Luke said gruffly, setting the satchel near a chair. Her lips curved faintly. "You keep saying that, as though if you say it twice I might believe it." He paused, unsure how to answer. He wasn't a man of speeches, only of work and silence. Yet something in her tone, half jest, half plea, pulled words from him. "You'll believe it soon enough," he said. "I aim to see you do." Clara removed her bonnet, revealing chestnut hair coiled in a modest knot. She let her hand sweep over the back of a chair, the edge of the hearth, the grain of the wooden table. Her fingertips lingered on each surface as though learning a map. "I'm not helpless," she said suddenly, her chin lifting. "People assume blindness means weakness. I manage. I learn. But I—" She hesitated, her breath trembling. "I was not told he meant to send me so far. I was not told." Her voice broke. "That he wished to be rid of me." Luke's chest tightened. Whoever had sold her into this arrangement had done so with cruelty. He could see the wound pride had left, sharp as any blade. He reached for a lantern, lit it, then set it on the table between them. "Clara," he said, voice low, "I didn't write for a servant. I didn't write for pity. I wrote because a man can only fight silence so long. I wanted someone beside me. If you'll stay, I'll see to it you're treated with respect." Her breath hitched, a flicker of relief crossing her face like dawn over dark hills. She clasped her hands together. "Then, I will stay." Outside, the Wyoming wind carried a new sound, hope, faint but steady, threading its way into the walls of the Hart Ranch. Morning came sharp and clear. The prairie sky stretched wide enough to swallow doubts whole. Luke had risen early, as always, tending to the stock before dawn. But when he returned, he found Clara already awake, standing in the doorway, with her hand on the frame, listening. "The land sounds alive," she said softly. "I can hear birds I don't know, the cattle lowing, even the wind moving through the grass." Luke tipped his hat, watching her. "You'll learn its language in time. Every sound means something." Clara smiled faintly. "Then perhaps I'll see more than most." He wasn't sure why her words struck him so deeply, but they did. He cleared his throat. "Come. There's work today, and I'll not have you idle if you don't want to be." Inside, he showed her the kitchen, the stove, the shelves, the water bucket near the door. Her fingers traced each carefully, mapping the world with patience. He watched in silence, struck by the grace in such simple motions. At last she turned toward him, her voice firm. "I can cook, clean, sew. I won't be a burden." Luke shook his head. "I don't see you as one," she faltered, then nodded once. The day stretched on. He mended a fence post while she kneaded dough at the table. Now and again he caught himself listening, not for danger on the wind as usual, but for the soft hum of her voice as she worked, a tune he didn't recognize. It settled in his chest like warmth after a long, cold spell. By sundown, the smell of fresh bread filled the small cabin. Clara's hands were dusted white with flour when she carried the loaf carefully toward the hearth. Luke rose to help, but she shook her head with quiet pride. "I can manage." And she did. They ate in silence, save for the crackle of firewood. Clara broke it at last, her tone steady but low. "Do the townsfolk know about me? About what I am?" Luke leaned back, gaze narrowing. "Not yet. Word spreads fast, though. When it does, they'll have opinions. They always do." Clara folded her hands in her lap. "I've been pitied, mocked, ignored. I don't want pity. If they call me useless, they won't." Luke cut in firmly. "Not while I draw breath." The words came harsher than he meant, but he saw the way her lips parted, her shoulders loosening just enough. No one had ever promised such a thing for her before. The lantern light softened her features, and for the first time, Luke realized this fragile-seeming woman was not broken at all. She was unyielding, forged by survival. And perhaps, he thought quietly, so was he. The next week carried them into a rhythm neither had expected. Luke rose before dawn, saddling his horse and riding the fence line, while Clara learned the paths through the cabin by heart. She cooked, swept, stitched worn shirts, each task careful, deliberate, yet never clumsy. Still, the world outside their ranch did not stay silent. It began in Willow Creek, the nearest town, when Luke stopped for supplies. The general store clerk raised a brow when Luke purchased calico fabric and needles alongside flour and salt. "Didn't know you had a woman up at the Hart place," the clerk said casually. "Mail order, they say?" Luke's jaw tightened. "Her name's Clara. he answered flatly. And she's my wife. The clerk smirked. Blind as a bat, I heard. Shame. You could have had your pick of half the county. Luke's fist itched for the man's jaw, but instead he gathered his goods and left. The words, though, chased him home like coyotes. That evening, Clara sat at the table, mending a torn sleeve by touch, her head bent toward the lamplight. Luke hesitated in the doorway, the insult heavy on his tongue. He didn't want her to know how cruel people could be. But she looked up, her clouded eyes sharper than he expected. They're already talking, aren't they? He exhaled. Yes. And they think you've made a mistake. Luke stepped closer, his shadow falling across her hands. Let them talk. I don't give a damn what they think. Her lips trembled, but not from fear. You'll defend me? Always. Silence settled between them, broken only by the crack of the fire. Clara's hands stilled on the fabric. Slowly she whispered, Then maybe I was not sold into shame. Maybe I was sent to something better. Luke's throat worked. Words lodged deep. He wanted to tell her she was more than he'd ever dreamed, that she had already begun to change the silence of his home into something alive. But he only laid a steady hand on her shoulder and said, You're not alone anymore. Outside, the prairie wind moaned against the walls, carrying with it the voices of a town eager to judge. But within the Hart Ranch, a fragile bond was taking root, stronger than any whisper. And neither of them, though they wouldn't yet admit it, had ever needed it more. By midsummer, the Wyoming sun bore down hard, burning the pastures into brittle straw. The creek that cut through Heartland ran shallow, its banks cracked, the cattle restless with thirst. Luke rode the range each morning, his face set grim against the haze of dust. Clara felt the change too, though she could not see the yellowing fields. She heard it in the low moans of the herd, in Luke's boots dragging heavier each evening, in the silence that followed him through the doorway. One night, as he sat at the table nursing black coffee, she reached across the wood until her hand brushed his sleeve. Tell me how bad it is. Luke looked at her, at the blind woman who somehow saw straight through him. He let out a long breath. If the rains don't come soon, I'll lose a third of the herd, maybe more. Clara's fingers tightened on his arm. What will you do? Dig another well? Pray. Ride north for better grazing if I have to. But his jaw clenched. It'll be a fight. Clara was quiet, then said, I may not lift fence posts or drive cattle, but I can help. I can make food stretch, keep the house ready, save your strength for the range. Luke's gaze softened. You've done more already than you know. The drought worsened. Each day, Clara rose before dawn, baking bread with what little flour remained, boiling beans until they stretched into 3 meals. Her hands blistered from work, but she never complained. When Luke staggered home, dust thick in his hair, she met him at the door, with cool water and the steady touch of her hand. One evening, he returned to find her sitting on the porch, the sunset's heat still heavy in the air. She held a tin cup of water, sipping slowly, her face tilted toward the sound of his boots. You smell of dust and sun, she said softly. But your voice, it still carries strength. That means we'll survive. Luke sat beside her, shoulders heavy, but her words pressed warmth into the cracks of his weariness. He looked at her hands folded in her lap, at the way the breeze stirred her hair. You've got more grit than anyone in this valley, he said quietly. Clara smiled, though her eyes stayed clouded. I only know what it means to endure. Together they listened to the parched wind sweep over the land. The drought pressed hard, but between them, something else was taking root, something deeper than fear, steadier than thirst. The drought drew more than dust. It drew desperate men. Luke noticed the first sign, when a fence line near the northern ridge was cut clean, the posts hacked with a dull blade. Cattle had wandered, leaving tracks that ended in nothing but churned dirt. Rustlers. That night he saddled his horse again, lantern light flickering across his face as he tightened the cinch. Clara stood in the doorway, her shawl wrapped tight, though the air was still hot. You're riding out? She asked, voice steady, though he could hear the worry beneath it. Just checking the range, he said, trying to keep his tone even. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. Don't lie to me, Luke. I may not see, but I hear the truth in your voice. His jaw tightened. He wanted to shield her, but she deserved honesty. Men are stealing stock. If I don't stop it, we'll lose more than drought can take. Clara's fingers lingered at his sleeve, gripping tight. Then take me with you. He blinked at her. Out there? No, Clara. It's too dangerous. She lifted her chin. So, is being left behind to wonder if you'll come home? For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Luke shook his head, rough but gentle. You're safer here. Always here. He pressed her hand against his chest, steady over his heartbeat. I'll come back. She listened to the thud beneath his ribs, then slowly let go. Then promise me this, don't fight alone. Even the strongest man breaks when no one stands beside him. Luke swallowed hard, nodding once. I promise. He rode into the night, rifle across his saddle, moonlight silvering the barren land. The prairie stretched wide and lonely, but in the distance, he caught the glow of fire too far from any homestead. He spurred his horse faster, jaw clenched. At the ranch, Clara sat by the window, her ears straining for every sound. The faintest hoofbeat, the cry of coyotes, the endless sweep of wind. She whispered a prayer she barely remembered from childhood, words falling like threads into the darkness. Hours later, hoofbeats thundered back. Luke dismounted heavy, dust streaking his face. His shoulder grazed where a bullet had torn his coat. Clara was at the door before he could knock, hands finding him as though she'd tracked his every step. You're hurt, she breathed. Just a scrape, he said, voice low. But they'll be back. Her hands trembled, but her jaw set with quiet resolve. Then we faced them together. And in that moment, Luke realized the blind woman who had stepped from a stagecoach with nothing had become the strongest ally he'd ever known. It was near harvest time when Luke finally rode Clara into Willow Creek. She sat straight in the saddle before him, bonnet shading her face, hands folded calmly in her lap. To anyone else, she looked every inch a rancher's wife. But Luke knew the tension in her stillness, the way her ears tilted toward every sound, the clatter of wagon wheels, the mutter of voices just a little too low. They dismounted outside the general store. Luke offered his arm, and Clara took it, her touch light yet sure. The bell above the door jingled as they stepped inside. Conversations faltered. Clara heard it instantly, the sudden hush, the scrape of boots shifting, the fabric of a dress brushing as someone leaned away. She lifted her chin, refusing to bow beneath their stares. Luke's voice was firm. Flour, beans, coffee, and nails. The clerk moved stiffly, piling goods on the counter. Clara could feel the heat of judgment pressing against her back like a brand. She broke the silence herself. I'd like fabric too, she said clearly. Blue calico, if you have it. The clerk hesitated. You sew, Miss Whitfield? My name is Mrs. Hart, Clara corrected, her tone calm but cutting. And yes, I sew. Luke hid a smile as the clerk fumbled, producing the cloth. Clara's hands brushed it, tracing the weave, memorizing its texture. She nodded once. This will do. As Luke paid, whispers rose behind them. Blind. Shame. Poor Luke Hart. Clara heard every word, sharper than needles. Her throat burned, but she held her head high, refusing to flinch. Outside, when they reached the horses, her composure cracked. They see me as useless, she whispered. Luke turned her gently, his calloused hand cupping her cheek. Let them see what they want. I see you. That's enough. Her breath caught, tears threatening, but she swallowed them back. You'll tire of defending me. Everyone does. Eventually. Not me, he said quietly. Never me. The words settled deep inside her, like water sinking into parched ground. That night, back at the ranch, Clara sat sewing by the fire. Her fingers worked the needle through the calico, stitch by steady stitch. Luke watched her in silence, the firelight softening the harsh lines of his face. Finally she whispered, almost to herself, if I can't change how they see me, then I'll show them what they can't. Luke leaned forward, his voice low. Certain. Clara, you already have. Outside, the Wyoming wind carried the town's judgment into the dark. But within the walls of the Hart Ranch, strength, quiet, unseen, unshakable, was being stitched together, one thread at a time. The rustlers returned on a moonless night. Luke heard the dog's first low growls, then frantic barking. By the time he grabbed his rifle, the cattle in the southern pasture were already bawling in panic. Clara sat up in bed, heart racing at the commotion. "Luke, stay inside," he ordered, pulling on his boots. "They've come back." But Clara swung her feet to the floor, reaching for her shawl. "If they take the herd, you lose everything." "I won't let them," he said, voice like flint. Then softer, "But you must stay safe." She listened to the chaos outside, the thundering hooves, the shouts of men. Something inside her clenched. She had promised herself she wouldn't be a burden, and she would not start now. Luke rode hard into the pasture, shots cracking through the night. Shadows moved quick in the dark, men with bandanas tied over their faces, driving cattle toward the ridge. He fired once, scattering them, then wheeled his horse to block the path. Back at the house, Clara moved by instinct. She found the lantern on the shelf, felt for the matches, and lit the wick until flames surged bright. Her hands trembled, but her mind was steady. She carried it to the porch and set it high, then dragged 2 more from the kitchen, lighting each until the homestead glowed like a beacon in the black prairie. The thieves shouted curses as the sudden light exposed their movements. Luke seized the chance, firing another shot into the air. The cattle scattered back toward the corral, confused but alive. Clara stood in the doorway, clutching her shawl tight, her face pale but resolute. She could not see the men riding away, but she heard the hoofbeats retreating, felt the ground's tremor fade into silence. Moments later, Luke galloped back, breathless, his horse lathered with sweat. He dismounted fast, striding to the porch. "You..." His words broke as he saw the lanterns blazing around her, the courage etched in her stance. "Clara, you saved the herd." She swallowed, voice shaking. "I thought, if they couldn't hide in the dark, maybe you could fight them back." Luke's chest heaved, his rifle still in hand, but his eyes softened. He stepped forward, gripping her shoulders. "You didn't just help me, you outsmarted them." Clara's lips parted, surprise breaking through fear. For once, she felt seen not as a burden, but as a partner. The night wind howled across the plains, carrying smoke and dust. But inside Lukehart's chest, something else stirred pride, fierce and unshakable. For the woman who had come blind into his world and now stood blazing like fire against the dark. The morning after the raid, the ranch was quiet but uneasy. Smoke lingered where torches had burned low in the grass. Luke walked the fence line with heavy steps, his rifle still slung across his shoulder. The cattle grazed nervously, and every creak of saddle leather put him on edge. Clara waited on the porch, listening for him. When he returned, she rose, her hand brushing the post for balance. "They'll come again, won't they?" Luke set his jaw. "Men like that don't quit easy." Clara turned her face toward the wind. "You've fought them before. I hear it in your voice." Luke froze. He hadn't meant to let that slip. But Clara's words left him no place to hide. He set the rifle against the wall and sank onto the porch step, his hat dangling from his fingers. "I wasn't always just a rancher," he admitted quietly. "Years back, I rode with men who did the same as those rustlers. Desperate times, I thought stealing cattle was the only way to survive. I quit before it ruined me, but I never quit carrying the shame." Clara's breath caught, yet her tone was steady. "That's why you fight them so hard now." He nodded once, eyes on the dirt. "If the town knew, they'd call me no better than the thieves. That's why I kept to myself, why I thought no decent woman would ever choose me." Clara stepped forward until she stood before him. Her hand found his shoulder, light but unwavering. "You chose different. That makes all the difference." Luke looked up at her, at the strength etched in her face, though her eyes saw nothing. He swallowed hard. "You're not afraid of what I've been?" "I know what it is to be judged for what I never chose," she answered softly. "I won't do the same to you." Silence stretched between them, heavy, but no longer sharp. Luke reached up, catching her hand in his, holding it against his chest. "Clara," he said, voice rough, "I don't deserve the faith you've given me." Her lips curved faintly. "Then prove me right." The word struck him deeper than any bullet. For the first time in years, Luke Hart felt the past loosen its grip. Not gone, but no longer choking. And Clara, who had come across the prairie with nothing but stubborn will, now carried a truth he'd never dared share with another soul. The sun dipped low, gilding the cabin walls with firelight. In that glow, two people scarred by judgment stood bound, not by perfection, but by choice, raw, fragile, and real. Autumn crept across the prairie, painting the cottonwoods gold. But inside the Hart cabin, change came with a different kind of whisper. Clara stood at the wash basin one morning, the smell of soap turning her stomach. She gripped the edge of the counter, breathing slow, steady. By noon, she could no longer hide it. Luke found her sitting on the porch steps, pale but resolute. "What is it?" he asked, crouching beside her. She turned her face toward him, her voice calm but edged with fear. "Luke, I'm with child." For a moment, silence swallowed the wind itself. Then, Luke's hand covered hers, warm and certain. "Clara, I don't need comfort," she cut in. "I need truth. A blind mother, out here in this wilderness, people will say the child is doomed before it draws breath. They'll use it to shame you." Luke's jaw tightened, the weight of the town's gossip already ringing in his ears. "Let them. This ranch is ours, not theirs. And this child," his voice broke, then steadied. "This child is ours too." Tears slipped hot down Clara's cheeks, though she kept her chin high. "You would claim it gladly, even knowing the burden?" He pulled her hand to his chest, just as he had on the day she arrived. "It isn't a burden, Clara. It's a beginning." But the world beyond their walls was not so kind. When Luke next rode into Willow Creek for supplies, whispers circled him like buzzards. A woman near the well sneered, "Blind as she is, how'll she raise a child?" Another muttered, "Fool rancher," tying himself to weakness. Luke ignored them, jaw clenched. But when the store clerk leaned across the counter and said too loudly, "Mighty convenient. A man with your past hiding behind a mail-order bride." Luke's fist slammed the wood so hard, jars rattled on the shelves. "You speak her name with respect," he growled. "Or not at all." The clerk paled, fumbling the goods into a sack. But Luke's anger followed him home like a storm cloud. That evening, Clara listened to his boots pace the floor. "They've turned on us, haven't they?" she asked. He froze, then forced himself to answer. "They talk, but I'll protect you." Her voice, soft but strong, reached him in the dim firelight. "You can't fight every word with fists, Luke. Let me show them myself." He turned, staring at the woman who had once stepped off a stagecoach trembling, satchel in hand. Now, she spoke with a strength that made the walls feel steadier. "You'll see," Clara said, a small smile playing at her lips. "I may be blind, but I will teach them what it means to truly see." And for the first time since the whispers began, Luke believed she could. Winter arrived hard and fast, snow swallowing the prairie until the Hart Ranch stood like an island in a sea of white. Clara moved slower now, her belly round with new life, yet her spirit seemed only to sharpen. She learned every creak of the floorboards, every path between hearth and table, until the cabin felt like an extension of herself. One bitter morning, Luke helped her into the wagon bound for Willow Creek. She insisted on the trip despite his protests. "I will not hide," she said firmly. "They'll see me as I am." The town square bustled with cold-faced men and women wrapped in wool. Their chatter dimmed when Clara stepped down from the wagon, one gloved hand resting on Luke's arm, the other bracing against the winter air. She walked steady, chin lifted. At the store, whispers rose like frost. "She'll never manage, poor child. A scandal waiting to happen." Clara turned toward the voices, her eyes clouded but her face radiant with calm. "I hear you," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. The murmurs stilled. "You see weakness, but you are blind to what matters. This ranch, this child, this life, we built it with work and with trust. That is more than gossip will ever give you." A silence followed, deep and sharp. Then, from the back, Mrs. Kowalski, the farmer's wife, who'd always shown a touch of kindness, stepped forward. "She speaks true," the woman said, laying a hand on Clara's arm. "And if you doubt her strength, Ask what man here would ride blind into a storm and still come out standing. A ripple of uneasy laughter broke the tension, and Luke saw heads bow, faces soften. For the first time, the judgment in their eyes faltered. Later, when the wagon creaked homeward through the snow, Clara leaned against Luke's shoulder, her breath warm in the cold air. "Do you think they understood?" she asked. Luke looked at her, at the life they were shaping, rough and unpolished but real. "They don't need to understand," he said quietly. "I do, and that's enough." At the cabin, he lifted her down, her boots crunching in the snow. She paused, hand resting on his chest. "Luke?" "Yes?" She smiled softly, the wind carrying her words like a vow. "You were right that first day. I am home." Inside, the fire crackled. The world hushed beyond their walls. And in that small cabin on the Wyoming frontier, two scarred souls found something the wilderness itself could not take: belonging. If this story stirred your heart, if you believe love can be built from trust, courage, and calloused hands, then join us again. Subscribe to Western Love Legends for more stories like this, and don't forget to like, because out here, where the frontier tests every soul, love is the truest frontier of all.